Now, first up, I'm delighted to welcome Kerry Bangle, who is Transport Planning Director, WSP. Now, Kerry has very kindly stepped in this morning due to unexpected illness. So please do give a very warm welcome to Kerry Bangle.
So, in a change to the advertised programme, I'm standing in for Simon Pope, who sadly has tested positive for COVID, which is perhaps the one thing that Andrew and Rachel don't want us to be interchanging at this conference. So to you and all, and in particular the members of the Simon Pope fan club who are here today, Simon sends his profuse apologies. And it's a shame because his talk was excellent. He was going to talk about the work he's leading for WSP, advising DFT on the forthcoming quantifiable carbon reduction guidance, snappy title, which is going to standardise how local transport authorities need to reflect and assess carbon in their decision-making. And Simon would have shown you this stark graphic showing how much our carbon budgets need to reduce over time to meet net zero down there in 2050. Please don't test me on this slide, it's not mine. But what it is showing is that with all good journey planning, we need to understand where we're going. How we get there is less important, but the time of arrival is critical. And this is one destination we want to arrive at early. So for me, what this slide shows is the massive gap. I think actually it's a chasm that we need to address. And this, coupled with the wider policy landscape, such as the recent Skidmore review, which really hits home that future economic prosperity will be predicated on our ability to act. And a letter from Baroness Veer last summer to the local transport authorities where she said that we are planning wider changes for local transport funding. And the new approach aims to support and incentivise local authorities to bring about the step change that we need to see if we are to decarbonise transport and cope with significantly increased demand for road space. So all of that means that there's never been a greater time or an imperative to grasp the nettle. And it's one of those nettles that I would like to talk about today, and that of road user charging. So I did get to the point eventually. So it's been an immense privilege for me as a transport nerd and my company WSP to support the Greater Cambridge Partnership on designing plans for what we've called a sustainable travel zone across the whole of the city. It's in quite a sensitive position at the moment as a project, so I'm only going to talk about things that are in the public domain. But just a quick introduction to the proposals. It covers the whole of the city area. I don't know if you could sort of see on that map, but it's not just the historic sort of university college core. The proposal that every car would pay £5 to drive within the zone. It's an area scheme, so it's within the zone, not just across a cordon. There's a higher schedule of charges for the larger vehicles, but it's £5 for a car, every car. There are no exemptions for electric vehicles. And that would be accompanied, as you can imagine, by a suite of discounts, exemptions and reimbursements to help mitigate any of the adverse impacts. The technology is pretty rudimentary. I'm calling it, much to the annoyance of my colleagues, cameras on sticks. Everywhere, ANPR camera technology to track and charge. And the objectives are to tackle many of the challenges that we're all familiar with in our towns and cities, predominantly congestion. Cambridge suffers from incredible congestion during peak times and at weekends in particular, but also air quality. There's a hideous lack of affordable and reliable bus services in the Cambridge area. Decarbonisation, naturally, and then public health benefits of getting more of us walking and cycling. It's hugely ambitious, and I think it's far bigger than anything we've seen in the UK. Geographically, it's bigger than the London congestion charge, and the modelling shows that it works. It delivers epic traffic reduction. It's the stuff of a transport planner's dream, frankly. I'd probably do this job for free, but don't tell the client that. But in essence, this creates two things. It's space for more active modes and the public transport, so buses aren't stuck in congestion, and crucially, an ongoing revenue stream. I mean, we've got 50 million there, but these are sort of outline revenue projections. But that revenue stream is locally raised. It's not subject to political vagaries, and it has to be spent on transport improvements. It has to be hypothecated back. But there's always a but. We're transport planners. There's always a but. It's hugely, hugely controversial. Charging for roads and for access to roads, particularly in the cost of living crisis, is very difficult. And for those of you at the dinner last night, I'm sorry to disagree with Paul Craven, but I don't think any amount of behavioural science can shift us out of our cars better than a cold, hard financial incentive. So I think road user charging must be one of the key tools in our decarbonisation toolkit, but it ain't easy. So during the 10-week consultation that we held, public consultation, which incidentally was some of the most challenging evenings of my life, and I've done runways. So I've talked to many people who rationally understand the problem of the climate crisis. They shake their heads in dismay when we talk about poor air quality in children's lungs. And they are rightly aghast at how many collisions there are on our roads and how busy the streets are, not like the good old days when you could play footy in the street. And they're utterly appalled, but mostly on others' behalf, at bus routes being cut by profit-hungry operators. But if you dare suggest that the most elegant way to address all of these issues is that they have to pay to use their car, well, in many cases that person turns militant and angry, and you know, expletives and some pretty actually threatening behaviour, to be honest. Because we're threatening their almost divine right to personal mobility. So these proposals are extremely divisive, as I say, and the views have really been whipped up and polarised in the media, mostly along class lines, which is really unhelpful. And the whole thing is now a political football, and it's going to get a good kicking in the run-up to the crucial local elections in May. And this may well turn out to be a crucial ballot box issue. So for those of you here yesterday, Matt Crisp said that Ford's slogan was about giving people freedom. And I think we've now created places and life patterns that don't afford that freedom equitably, and they don't properly work without access to the car. So I thought, just trying to draw to a close, really. It's quite funny, but it is true, but it's sadly funny, I think. I thought I'd show you a thread from Twitter about the Cambridge proposals. So I don't know if, hopefully you can read that, but just to summarise, a challenge has been set by someone to the Cambridge politicians, by a resident, to make some typical journeys using public transport. And you apparently can be loaned 2 children to make these journeys with. I'd like to offer mine, but I don't know. They're not so keen. So it sounds fun, doesn't it? It's a bit like Challenge Annika, which is a cultural reference showing my age. But as with all good challenges, there are constraints. So you have to pick up groceries. Your children aren't in the same school. They have obviously very complex after-school trip-making needs, one of whom is in a swimming club and one of whom does archery. And you've got to feed them as well. So this challenge was obviously then picked up by the Twitterati, who are a humorous bunch sometimes anyway. So what that Anthony Painter's saying there is that there's this version to catching a bus and how are geographically dispersed activities enabled by the car. And apparently we struggle to find supermarkets. So Katie comes back with, well, if you read the challenge, you'd note that the older child has archery. Have you ever tried to carry a longbow on a bus? And I'm particularly amused by her point that she says, get real, but yeah. So this is what we're facing, but then obviously then it gets picked up, and this one did actually make me laugh. Right, kids, get in the Volvo. And you'll note that I've liked that one. I probably shouldn't get involved in the politics of all. But so I guess the key point I want to land in closing is that the Cambridge proposals represent a window onto the challenges that we're facing to decarbonise transport. And I firmly believe, as I said, that the scale of this challenge is far too great for us to achieve this, what we need to without this sort of direct action being in the mix. And we talked a lot about collaboration yesterday, and that is patently critical for achieving this. But we also, I think, need to talk about bravery and political courage in particular. And I know this sounds incredibly naive, but these sorts of schemes need to have cross-party agreement because they're going to hurt. They're going to hurt some people in the short and medium term, the hard-pressed middle, and the just surviving folks for whom public transport really doesn't work. But don't forget, there are 20% of the households in this country that can't afford a car. The young, the elderly, and women have less access to cars and suffer transport poverty as a result, and then they lack access to opportunities. So how do we level up for them? Younger generations don't want to own cars. So I think this isn't all doom and gloom. There are enormous upsides for society if we can get it right. And if the image here tells us anything, it's to keep our sense of humour. Thank you.
So don't forget, everybody, #interchange is the way that you can ask Kerry any questions that you like directly. Okay, so I'll start off actually, Kerry, by asking you about the fact that this is all about driving change at a local authority level. Is that right? So the only problem is local authorities notoriously don't have any money. So how does this all work then?
So can you hear me? Yeah. The beauty of this, I mean, it isn't just a local authority problem, but I think what we're increasingly seeing is that these thorny issues are being pushed down to the local level because we're able to tackle them there, but I'll be a bit bold and say central government are shying away from some of the difficult questions on this. The beauty of road user charging is it does generate money. It's an ongoing revenue stream that isn't going to be subject to, as I said, the political vagaries, who's in power at the time, who supports who, what's in fashion at the time. It's locally derived money that can be locally spent on locally identified priorities. And that hypothecation is really important. And I think for local people to see where that money's going and how it's being spent gives that a degree of accountability to policymakers and politicians. It's very important.
Interesting. We've had a question, actually. Thank you for your questions, by the way. With politics, as it is, we seem to be in a race to the bottom. What's your thoughts on that?
It's so good the question got asked twice. Yeah, I completely agree. And allied to the question above, that, we need to be brave, but it requires leadership. I think all of these things, for me, seem to be lacking. It's difficult. There are trade-offs that have to be made, and we don't seem to be very, very good at demonstrating those trade-offs or talking about them in public, particularly our politicians, our policymakers. We need to admit that these are difficult decisions and there will be winners and losers, and we need to try and obviously make sure that the winners are more than the losers, and that the losers are supported, and that those losers are not the least able to to defend themselves in society, so that the groups that I mentioned, the marginalised people in society, need to be the ones that we are trying to win for.
Another question that's come in: how are you managing this, Kerry, from a PR and comms perspective, and trying to compete with misinformation and mixed messages?
Well, I'm pleased to say that's largely a job for the client, but we have supported the client. We did the consultation exercise was their biggest ever. I think we had 24,000 consultation responses, which was unheard of, which is actually larger number than the London bus consultation received. So we personally were really pleased with that level of engagement we got, and there was a very high number of young people within that, which are notoriously hard to reach. So I think we did that through a lot of, obviously, social media is very popular with young people. So we're really proud of how we've managed the messaging through social media channels. But it does take an awful lot of proactivity and information at your fingertips as well, which we found is quite hard. Having it seemed to be that we have to quote statistics that are very well evidenced, and they've got 17 sources, and some eminent professor has backed them up, whereas an anti lobby group can say whatever they want. Oh, you're going to kill the centre of Cambridge, and so what we found is in the communications, the same rules don't apply to the various parties, which makes it more challenging.
Interesting. Just one final question, because unfortunately we are running out of time. If this vital scheme is defeated at the ballot box, then what do you think the future is for other local road pricing schemes? Interesting question.
Yeah, thanks, Sav. I think that is a real threat to this. I think because everyone's looking at how everyone's doing it. We've all looked. Manchester made their forays, and very high-profile failure, and I think that's scared a lot of people, put a lot of people off going for this sort of thing. So I think other towns and cities will be watching Cambridge closely, and if it does fail, I think this will set us all collectively back. I mean, national road pricing is always 10 years away, isn't it, as a joke? The report that the Transport Select Committee put out is 2 years now it's been waiting for it to be responded to. So I think road pricing is just very difficult. So if this one is defeated at the ballot box, I think it does set the whole agenda back, sadly. It's a bit depressing.
I want to end on a high, so now I'm going to have to ask you another one. We're not going to end there. Just one quick one. Let's find one that's going to give us a little bit more optimism. I'll let you choose.
If not road pricing, then what? I think it's, as with all of these things, I'm not going to sit on the fence. We need road pricing, but we do need a collection of other things that needs to sit alongside it. It can't be all carrot and can't be all stick and no carrot. And crucially, as we all know, the carrots have to come before the sticks. So I think some form of fiscally, financial incentive or disincentive to drive has to be part of the mix. So I don't think we've got an alternative to road pricing, frankly.
Okay, all right then, Kerry. Sort of optimistic. I don't know. But you know what? Thank you so much for stepping in at the last minute. That's amazing. Thank you. Let's give her a big round of applause. I do appreciate it.